Good, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I apologize if some of you had technical difficulty with the WebEx access getting in. Hopefully everyone is in at this point. If not, what I'd like to do first is to get started here. Today's presenter is Marty Michael, Miria Systems Managing Partner. During the course of the webinar, should you have any technical problems or you have the need for any technical support or you have any questions that come up during the webinar, please send an email to jlanigan@miriasystems.com. It's on the screen, but I'll spell it JLANNIGAN at Miria, M-I-R-I-A, systems.com. And with that, we're going to get started today in respect of everyone's time. Our agenda today is, as we said before, the theme of our presentation is about managing accounts payable for the retail environment. For today is going to cover business challenges for advanced accounts payable in retail, the business case for automating accounts payable, the components of accounts payable automation, why retail is more challenging, things to consider as you make your choices and your selections. At the end of this presentation, we'll cover questions and answers. So as I said prior, please send any questions you have to jlanigan@miriasystems.com. First off, about Miria Systems. Miria Systems is a 25 leader in business process automation and content enablement. We're offers of Managed Pay, which is an accounts payable automation solution. We are IBM business partner specializing in content management and business analytics, multiple industry expertise, including intelligent capture, complex document management, work process automation, and case management, payable, of course, medical records, and engineering information. Miria, his mission is to enable our customers to improve their internal business processes that will save time, money, and help them to improve the quality of their own products and services. Miria has expertise across the full spectrum of content management, from left to right, from the capture, where you're ingesting or capturing what is typically a paper process, activate it or incorporate it with your business processes, how to socialize it or collaborate on the information, how to analyze it or gain business intelligence, and how to govern it for clients and for record retention. As we said, an IBM Premier Business Partner with specialties and advanced training in IBM DataCap, IBM FileNet, Cognos, Maximo, and other technologies. So right to the reason why you're all here today. We're going to talk about the accounts payable business challenge. In the first few slides here, we want to quantify, if we can, some of the elements that will help you gain a reasonable return on your investment. So let's talk a little bit about the business challenges of a multi-location retailer. We need to process and manage a large number of vendor invoices, normally across a wide network of central and local vendors with a lot of decision makers and a lot of different approvers in the business process. Many times, our customers in retail have invoices in multiple formats. They have inefficient review, match, and approval processes. They often have a high error rate when keying in the data. They may have the inability to proactively manage their discounts. Delay in payment processing can often lead to challenges with your vendors. Time that you'll spend on the phone calls answering questions such as, when will I be paid? Do you have my invoice in the process? And of course, the very top of this list, although the bottom here, is limited visibility of cash outflows to see what's going to get paid and when that cash has to go out the door. Things that we like to look at in terms of this market is, what are the best practices requirements of a solution that you put together? First, business processes need to enforce your strong internal controls and best practices. You need something that's scalable and streamlined to manage costs. You need the ability to be accountability of the authorizations, your approvals, and your reviews. Visibility is very important, including audit trails, so you can see who did what, when, and where. The management of vendor information and communications is an important issue, and compliance and oversight obviously a big requirement of this process. process. Morally, when we talk about return on investment, finite impact of AP automation is a key element when you're trying to justify why you need to change your business process and how are you going to allocate money to make that happen. The one area of financial impact is in FTE, or full-time equivalent productivity. How many people does it take to process the invoices you have coming every day? Reduce the cost of paper handling and storage. How do you improve the improvement of accuracy of financial forecasting? The document and process flow controls. How do you improve accessibility to real-time information? Improving vendor relations, improving cash management, and improving real-time reporting and analytics. We're going to cite a couple sources here in a moment, actually in the next slide where we talk about industry metrics. And the sources here are Arden Partners, Aberdeen Group, Payable Advisors. These are all consultants that specialize in this area who can add a lot of value if you're trying to assess whether you want to move forward with AP automation or not. But some information from these sources that talks about the company average, or what does it take for most companies to process an invoice. And you see that the average cost is $19 per invoice. The number of invoices per processor that can be processed is about 1,500. The time cycle to receive, approve, and schedule to pay on average is around 10 days. Most customers in the surveys and the data that we've seen are still receiving 80% of their invoices via paper. They have a processing error rate of around 6%. The invoice error, the invoices received with errors is really running around 14%. Now, in contrast, what we want to show you here in red is what you really hope to achieve. You can see that in the same surveys, best-in-class invoice processing, you should be able to get it down below $2 depending on your business situation. It's pretty easy to measure your return on investment right there. If you're looking at your company average is 20 and you can achieve best class of $2, that's a 10-to-1 ratio right there. Your number of invoices per processor, can go up to 4,000 plus. You can cycle time down to 3 days. In addition, if you choose the right tools, which have the capabilities to integrate EDI and e-invoicing and other sources, you can reduce the amount of paper you have to process dramatically, as well as reduce your overall error rates indicated by the last two columns. Again, I would recommend that you go to online sources for some of these groups listed at the bottom, look at their information, and gain third-party validation of these items. Let's take our word for it. A particular interesting slide here shows the top pressures driving people who are looking at AP improvement or AP automation, with number one area being the lack of visibility into invoices and AP documents. Core directives to lower cost are a big driver, and difficulty finding or managing paper-based documents. Those three items alone, most of the respondents to this survey by the Aberdeen Group really illustrate some of the things we talked about in the prior slides. And by the way, this slide presentation will be made available to you offline after this presentation by request. So let's move forward. Let's talk a little bit at a high level. And the approach we're going to take here today is to talk about this at a high level and try to drill down a few more details in certain areas to make sure that all the audience gets a full understanding of what we're trying to talk about here. So the components of AP automation, in simple terms by a block diagram, are three steps. The first being receive. You receive the invoice in. It may come in via mail, via fax machine, email, EDI, e-invoice, or other. Then you need to process it. You need to validate it. Somebody's got to read it and make sure it's correct. Often you have to input it into a system if you're doing it manually, whether that's your purchase order system or it's your accounting system. You need to approve it. You need to measure it through a workflow routing process. You may need to send alerts if there are certain things going on with it, and there are corrections and disputes to handle. And then you see at the very end of that cycle, you need to pay for it. Often you may need to write a check, may do a wire transfer. We're going to talk somewhat about P cards in this process because those are becoming more and more something that our customers are utilizing today, and you still need to be able to manage what happens with the purchasing cards as well. When you take the same elements, and we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the challenge of retail. Now, we've chosen a case study here of a customer very familiar with, P.F. Chang's restaurant. Many of you may know them for the great Chinese food at one of their two different channels out there, one of them being Payable, the Asian diners, and the other being P.F. Chang's China Bistro. It has 160 locations. P.F. Chang's has plus 190 locations. Essentially, they need to process everything in Scottsdale, Arizona. About 100,000 invoices per year. Remote inbound fax was the normal way that they received them, but they also received a lot of invoices via mail and email. And then they needed to integrate that whole process with Microsoft Great Plains, or now, and they've since transitioned that over to Exapta solution. What they needed to achieve, their functionality that they were looking for, is they needed document capture and scanning. They need to be able to manage configurable workflows and validations of each invoice. They needed automation of pre-match and reviews and approvals, email notifications, and exception routing. Now, prior to selecting automated solution, what they were doing was they were FedExing invoices out to Scottsdale on a daily basis, FedExing them back to restaurants for approvals, and in some cases FedExing them a third time depending on the situation if it had something to be resolved. And you can imagine the amount of time that took, the amount of time it took to enter the data into the systems, and the amount of errors that typically happened in that overall process. The main issue here was just the terrible inefficiency of the whole thing. So to manage all that and then retain it and avoid filing those and then being able to find them later were all part of what they needed to achieve. So this is a quote, and there is a P.F. Chang's case study that's available that you can send a request by the same email that we've put out for questions today, and we'll be glad to share that with you. But Tammy Walesky here, the Director of Financial Operations, her quote was, they knew that the existing processes were not scalable for our growth, so we selected Miria Systems and Managed Pay to help automate our seek-to-pay process and better align with our business. Of all the options they researched, Managed Pay was the best match for accounts payable and workflow. But this is a really good case study because you can imagine the day in the life of a general manager after the process. After the system went into place and the automation system went in place, each of those restaurant locations now receives all their invoices, put them in one single stack, they walk over to the fax machine, fax off into the cloud, and then they destroy those invoices at that point. Because on the other end, the system reads, picks those up, manages, and puts them into a routing and a workflow process back to their desk on the computer so that the whole process is fairly streamlined at that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the details of that process in a moment, but keep that picture in your mind of managing those invoices nearly every day as we talk through this process. Let's talk a little bit about the solution and what we did there. So talk about the solution. I said in the process, the first thing that happens is capture. You've been receiving your invoices via email, via fax, or via invoices or scanned pieces of paper. From there, what we need to do is we need to process that image, because when it comes in, it's just a picture or an image of an invoice. So we need to code it of ICR, which stands for Intelligent Recognition, Character Recognition, if you pull handwriting off, or OCR if you need to pull typewriting, which is most typical in payable invoices. Then you need to index it or extract information, and then you need to validate that that information is accurate. Now, the systems we propose, if you see the down arrow there, we propose that our customers store their images in a content management system so that they have long-term image retention, and they can index and search that data at leisure outside of this process or even within the accounts payable process. Now, another component of this is the validation part. So we mentioned before that there is often an integration to their purchasing system, their inventory management system, or in some cases the accounting system as well, or most typically, the accounting system. Often the purchasing and the accounting system are the same system, but not always. And by using the information in there, we can validate each invoice back against that data. In addition, the system needs to integrate what we call a vendor portal so that vendors can submit e-invoices but also the location where the vendors can go in and sign in and check the status of their payment or check the status of their invoice scheduled for payment. Purchasing card or P-card integration is an important element, as well as travel expenses is an optional thing that you can add in, or as well as EDI. But the most important component here is the overall workload processing that we recommend that you apply a common approach for all of these different inputs there. All these items from purchasing to travel expenses to AP have a cash impact, and managing the approval process is very important. In addition, if you look at the little blocks below the common workflow processing, we mentioned before that purchasing detail it can be a part of this if you have a lot of purchase orders that are issued. Well, you want a system that can handle both PO and non-PO based. Line items to inventory could be important if, for example, you're a restaurant chain and you're receiving in invoices because you're buying alcohol or food products, and you need to integrate those into your point of sale system. It can be validated for loss prevention and loss control. When you sell an item, those can become part of your inventory. And then maybe the most important to the accounting and AP people is make sure each invoice is coded and approved with the right accounting codes. And as we talked many times, payment data, you may want to be able to submit that back either to your call desk so they can answer vendor calls, or directly, ideally, back to the vendor portal so the vendor can go in themselves and see what's happened with their payment or when it's scheduled to be paid. On this slide, we're just showing a little bit more of a drill down, but you'll see, obviously, there's an example of an invoice on the right. This happens to be a Coca-Cola invoice to a vendor. It has line item detail down at the bottom and has a vendor header, and you're going to capture that. The most important part, though, is when we drill down on that, we talk about how to capture, index, and validate that. So capture relevant data. So if you see in the upper right-hand corner of the invoice by the green block, you have the typical invoice date, invoice number, the amount due, the total, and the due date. In purple, you have the remittance address. In blue block, there may be discount information for prepayment. In yellow block, there may be line item details. Another can choose by the way you set it up to ignore that line item detail and just the headers, or take the line item detail in for item. But we will extract that information, read off of the image, turn it into text. We want to validate it by checking the vendor remittance back to our vendor master to make sure it's routed to the same point. We want to be able to check line items as we, in many cases, and if there's a purchase order, we may want to be able to validate that invoice against the purchase order itself. And all of this is done in the system and the way it's configured and based on your needs if you choose the right system for your business. And obviously the last bullet on this slide is, when this is all set on and after we capture this, we still want to retain this image because you may need to come back and look at it later and say, what invoice can you see a copy of the physical invoice? And the actual invoice is always retained in a properly designed system. So we'll talk a little bit about, let's drill down on these items that we had at the top of our previous full system slide. And vendor portal capture e-invoices and processing queries is important. In an ideal situation, you're going to be able to come in, your vendors are going to come in and be able to submit an invoice. And depending on your business, that may be something that you're interested in or not. They're also, more importantly, going to be able to do a search and say, when am I going to get paid? Or have I already got paid, and what's the check number? Purchasing card integration, one of the things we've done for our customers is we can take a card feed directly from American Express, or in this case, a purchasing card feed. And when we bring that in, we bring all that information in and present it back to the user so that approvals are now handled directly online through the system, and they're managed through the workload processing that you'll see in a moment. That avoids a lot of the data entry, and it also reduces the errors that you might encounter if you were just to scan those. We go to W-9 processing for the vendor. We can make travel expenses, change approvals, and eventually location. And at the same time, as we talked about, you may need direct capability to some of your vendors for EI capabilities, and that's all handled through Workload. a separate module. Now, it's important to note that in Miria's system, each of these things are individual components. You may not need all of them. You may need one or two, and you can choose part those that based on your needs. It's also worth noting here that we talked about, recommendation that we integrate this with a CMS. Systems out there will simply take the information and store it into a database, which has value. If you already have a central content management system, for example, many of our customers utilize IBM FileNet for a content management repository, it's very helpful to bring that information from the accounts payable solution back into the same system where we already indexed it, and now it's searchable, secure, and accessible, and now you can start obtaining business intelligence from this information that may not be readily available from your ERP or your accounting system today. Now, it's really important when we talk about those integrations of the different servers. Now, I talked about this a little bit on the big picture item, but managed purchase order against purchase ordering system is clearly something that a lot of our customers are interested in. But I've already mentioned that you'll be able to have the ability to handle both non-PO and PO-based systems. But you may need to bring those non-PO-based orders some type of inventory, such as a point-of-sale system. Running codes and are a part of it that are assigned by rules in the system based on configurations that you would be able to set up with your vendor if you're going to choose a solution like this. And we've already talked about a couple of these things as far as collecting of payment data and that. But when you're looking at this whole picture and you look at some of the ROI tools that are out there to be able to quantify whether you can afford or to spend money or how much money you're going to save if you do this, one of the things that you want to look at is not just your processing time, how much people that are involved with it, but you also want to look at your ability to improve your process. If best practices for approvals, it's probably very difficult to do that on a manual process, but with system as well designed, you should be able to configure those rules to manage that workflow so that SOPs and policies can be followed. If we look at common workflow processing, we're going to touch on this in a minute, but the customers that we've talked about here today, and we're going to use in a couple case studies towards the end of this, they will often want to integrate their workflow in with their LDAP and their Active Directory configuration, so you don't have to maintain that user base twice. You already know who reports to who, so we usually set up rules in the workflow that say everything, for example, over $10,000 has to be approved by a manager. Everything over $2,000 has to be approved by a vice president level. Everything over $100,000 that's also computer IT related also needs the approval of the vice president of information technology. Users are really infinite there in the number of workflow scenarios that you might want to set up in order to manage your process. So we utilize in these pictures here, this is IBM's business process management tool, which helps to model through drag and drop capabilities of those queues. And this is a little detailed, but I'm not going to walk you through particular steps in this process. Obviously, you run it through. This one is about invoices awaiting payment in a queue. And we do everything through queue management, where if an invoice comes in and it goes through, everything's validated and it's approved, there are rules that you can set up so that is just paid automatically in the system, but there may be other rules that are set up that route those into a queue where a human intervention is required to go in and review that and approve that. You would set up different workflows for different processes. Here we perform a check on non-PO invoices, and a configurable percentage are passed to a queue for review by the AP department. From there, you can route it to vendor maintenance if there's a problem with the vendor name. If there's a problem with the invoice, it may need to go back to be rescanned, and that would be a queue that gets routed back. But so what I just said on the prior slide, without walking through the details of these workflows, you have the ability to drag and drop and model this workflow the way you want it for your process. it's also important to think of what this process is something that goes beyond accounts payable management. This is a simple example here of an issue where it may have to trigger a tax audit. Good examples are sales tax tracking and management. If you have different states that you're managing sales tax payments for, we can set up configuration rules in there that collects that information and manages that to a tax or accountant or department within your own company. The approval process is the one that things most people are interested in. In a well-designed system, you're going to get a notification. There is a invoice for approval. You can figure that happens on a mobile device or it happens through email. The user would need to sign in and log in because you're going to want to maintain security of that environment, and then they would be able to approve that process, moves on to the next step. I think we've probably covered the workflow enough, but one of the things that happens with a lot of situations is what we call vendor maintenance. Invoices may get outed in, but maybe they come in and there's no vendor approved for that, or maybe the vendors changed their name. All of those things can get triggered into a queue so that they can be maintained centrally and your systems will stay up to date. So those are good examples of the workflow. These are usually where most people on this cards have the most questions. So I want to take a second to just remind you again, if you have questions, I'd like please send them by email to jlanigan, that's JLANNIAN @mariasystems.com, and we will address those in a few minutes here. We have 5 minutes of the active presentation before we get into questions and answers. What we want to come back to now is to kind of show you how this all pulls together. This is an example of a large wholesale or a large retail operation. Cabela is the world's foremost outfitter. They have a rather elaborate configuration. If you look at the different logos in the presentation, their system is utilizing IBM's data cap for around the blue block where it talks about capturing and the image processing. The content management system that all of the invoices are pushed to and the information is pushed to is IBM's FileNet PA. In their particular case, on the right side down below the orange blocks, you'll see that their purchasing system and their accounting system are JA application, and then the server there, they tie this directly to their LDAP hierarchy for approvals in the process. They are utilizing the full gamut of vendor portal, P-cards, travel, and EDI in the process. So it's a great one to look at in terms of, utilizing the full breadth of the solution. Now, we take the same case study that we illustrated before for PAs. Very similar situation. Again, we are utilizing IBM's data cap for the picture image and image processing part of this solution. It's also going to IBM FileNet P8. And in their particular case, they are not leveraging the vendor portal and travel expenses and those type of things, but they are tying it directly into an inventory point of sale system. As I mentioned before, it's a great solution if you've got an inventory point of sale that's tracking the amount of food sales and the amount of alcohol sales in the case of a restaurant like this. Maybe entering that information manually, and the solution will streamline that so that it all becomes part of the same process. They're tying it into the LDAP directory, and they're integrating directly with Microsoft Great Plains, and as I said before, that's now turned over to Microsoft Great Plains Exapta, or they call Dynamics Exapta now, I think. The point of this is that, when we look at this solution, the IBM data cap as an image capture and image processing solution is really best in class. You can go out and look at the matrices put together by the consultants, and they show you that it's clearly in the upper quadrant of far its capabilities. Likewise, the IBM FileNet P8 solution are very capable content management solution there. If you already have a SharePoint solution, We integrate this directly into SharePoint as opposed to FileNet, and then obviously there are other choices out there in all of these particular areas of functionality. Coming to the end of the overall presentation here, the IBM solution here really is designed to cover the full breadth of the AP automation requirements. This is the same slide that I used before, but hopefully what we've tried to do today is help you tie it together. We're going to know you a few boards. We're not going to do a demonstration of product today. We really don't have time for it. But this particular screen here was going to show you some metrics that you should be able to help capture out of any solution you choose. This particular screen here is a dashboard illustrating what's going on in the scanning or the first part of that process, the capture process. It can show you how many pages and documents are scanned by the operator, what is the volume per month, and what's the average time to process. Likewise, another metric dashboard here would be under invoicing analysis. What are your invoices that you're receiving by month, by type? Type in this case could be PO and non-PO, but it may be 2 or 3 options depending on what your requirement is. What terms, net 20, net 30, net 60, and what's the payment method for each of that vendor. So these are all configurable, so we can parse this information however you need it to meet your particular metrics. Another one is invoices processed. What's the invoices by type, average days of process, and the completed workflow steps are all important elements of looking at the analytics of how your process